Okay, Chris Foster, please get this show started.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. I'm Chris Foster. I'm president of BCW North America, and we are delighted to have a conversation today about CES 2021. And I'm joined by two very, very exciting, very dynamic speakers. And I'll start with introducing Alyssa Carson. At 19 years old, Alyssa's accomplishments are bigger than I'd say most of us. I mean, it's literally reams and reams of paper. So I'm going to read 3 or 4 that may just be really helpful for the group. She's the youngest graduate of the Advanced Space Camp and the first person to complete the NASA Passport program. In October 2016, she was the youngest to be accepted and to graduate from the Advanced Possum Academy, which officially allows her, she's certified, and to travel into space as a trainee. So we're going to have a great conversation with Alyssa in a few minutes. Later in the hour, we'll also spend some time talking with Shawn DuBravac on all things CES. Shawn is a best-selling author, futurist, and trendcaster who writes frequently on disruptive technologies, shifts in technologies, and their impact on society. He serves currently as the chief economist for the Consumer Technology Association, which is the trade association that represents more than 2,000 technology companies and the producer of CES. In addition to that, Shawn is the president of astronaut-in-training, which is a consulting firm where he consults with companies globally. So we're up for a star-studded hour. But I want to start with Alyssa, who I think you see in a spacesuit. So really exciting to have you here today. So thanks so much. So tell us about your passion for space and sort of when did it start? How'd that all work?
And Alyssa, just so you know, you're muted at the moment, so just hit on mute and you'll be on. Great.
Yeah, really my passion for space started for just about as long as I could remember. I was always interested in space as a little girl, and you know, my dad remembers me coming up to him and asking questions about space and Mars and if anyone had been there before and all of these questions. And so my dad obviously didn't know a whole bunch about space. It wasn't really anything my family was involved with. No one had a science or space career, but he told me a little bit about the missions to the moon, which kind of sparked my interest, and I just continued to want to learn more about space after that. And so my passion for it kind of progressed the more I learned about it.
That's fantastic. And I'm so intrigued, I think a lot of our listeners are, about your work with NASA and Space Camp and the Passport program. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, really, there's no set way to become an astronaut or get involved in the space industry. There's no checklist, so I was really just kind of seeking out any way I can to learn more about space and about what was going on. I started by just going to space camp, really just to learn more about space. You know, it was the easiest way for me to learn stuff. Obviously, the Passport program was visiting the NASA visitor centers, which was obviously an amazing opportunity. But yeah, it was really just a way to help me figure out what kind of career I would want to do in the space industry, and then start building a resume to go on top of that. And that's kind of where Project Possum came into play, being able to do some real life research, being able to test spacesuits and fly in microgravity and you know, do so many cool experiences and gain a lot of cool experience. And so that was really amazing. So the whole journey has just been, you know, me seeking out any sort of opportunities I thought would benefit a resume, and then yeah, just having a whole lot of fun with it at the same time.
I think your resume has benefited. So well done. So let me ask you this, just pivoting us a bit. Have you been to CES in the past, and why do you think it's important, you know, for aspiring young adolescents and women to, you know, girls to engage in CES and the technology industry in general, which I know is a passion of yours?
Right. Yeah. You know, I think that in general, the tech industry is growing so quickly, and there's so many new avenues to really go down. And, you know, it's something I speak about a lot in terms of, you know, the amount of jobs that are out there that you don't necessarily think of as a kid. You know, I think that when we're young, we kind of get told a lot of the same jobs, whether that's, you know, teacher, doctor, lawyer, a lot of those same jobs that we hear when we're young. But there's so many crazy, unique jobs, and tech is obviously full of those. So yeah, so I definitely think it's a great avenue for kids, especially girls, to look into at the kind of jobs that they could potentially have in the future. And I think CES is a good example of that, of yeah, girls really being able to see, you know, what kind of cool tech they can get involved with, what can they participate in, you know, what opportunities or what can they listen to maybe younger to help push them towards what they want to do in the future. What experience can they gain from listening to possibly some events or anything along those lines? So yeah, I definitely think it's great to encourage kids to be adventurous in terms of seeking out different careers that they're interested in, because it's those kinds of events that are going to spark their interest and hopefully push them forward towards following their own dreams.
That's great. No, and you're a real inspiration. I guess central to technology and your interest in space must have been some interest in STEM. And as you're on your journey, like, how did you actually become exposed to and interested in STEM, or was that a result of space camp, or what was that journey like for you?
Right, yeah, I mean, totally. When I was a little girl talking about my interest in space, I didn't really have any connections towards, necessarily it being like a male-dominated field or any sort of STEM connection. To be honest, I was really just interested in space. But I mean, in general, just going to school, I definitely excelled more in math and science anyway. I found it more fascinating to begin with, so that kind of already pushed me into the STEM realm anyway. But I mean, even when I was young, I would go to little, science fairs that would be set up, at the local university or little things like that, talking to where they would have, booths set up with, the local observatory or little small science experiments. So I think those little fairs and things like that were super popular for me to really see the different types of areas of STEM. And that's probably when I got some of my first exposure to it. And I mean, Space Camp also had a good part of that. I mean, definitely that was focused on space. And when I was young, I didn't even really connect space to STEM. To me, space was like my own little world that I was living in and having a good time learning about. But yeah, definitely, given the fact that I was interested in space and that it's kind of what I excelled at school anyway, it just kind of continued to merge together into something that developed into what all I'm doing now.
That's great. Two quick questions and then we'll pivot. But so I'm assuming with all you've been able to accomplish over the years, you've had to overcome some obstacles along the way. You sort of referenced some. Can you share one or two obstacles you've had to overcome on your pursuit to where you are today?
Yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of the different things that I've been able to do, they definitely aren't meant for people my age or at the age that I did them. So that's definitely been an obstacle in terms of, semi-proving myself to be able to do some of these, realistic campaigns or research. So that's been definitely a huge step, I would say. And then also, and a lot of the stuff that I've done is definitely kind of just getting over the fear factor of a lot of things. I remember I did water survival training up with survival systems. They had us, seat belted into a contraption, flipping us underwater, telling us to push out a fake window and escape. And I was so convinced I was going to drown, but stepping off of platforms and, all sorts of the crazy things I've been able to do. A lot of that comes with fear and actually getting over those. So that's definitely been a big obstacle as well. And just really trying to prove that I can do it and also prove to myself that I'm able to do all of this as well. But it's definitely been a challenge working with people a lot older than me, especially in some of the classes. Everyone is way past my education level, being only a sophomore, but it's definitely been trying to, climb that ladder and really ask for advice and ask for their help to be at that same level where they are.
That's great. That's great. So last question. So a lot of the audience are in some way or form connected to the tech industry. So what do you think the tech industry could do more of to support your dreams, or even young people like yourself who aspire to do more in technology?
Right. Yeah, totally. I definitely think that in terms of space, we're constantly looking for new tech, pretty much. I definitely think the space industry is constantly evolving to kind of incorporate new technology. And, when you look at space, everything that we use in space is relatively old, actually. We use a lot of old technology because it takes time to get it all certified, safe for space. By the time we build a rocket, 5 years have passed by and technology has well surpassed where we were at. And so definitely, I think as far as tech just continuing to evolve the way it has that's been huge in terms of the space industry. You know, right now looking at a mission to Mars, right now we're expected that to take around 6 months to actually travel from Earth to Mars. However, we know that we have the technology of plasma engines that can actually reduce that time down to 6 weeks. You know, can we get that down even more? Can we develop even more advanced engines? You know, there's always a next step, I think, in space. And so I think that, yeah, as long as we stay on top of it and continue to develop those technologies and continue to explore more of space and learn more, then we're definitely going to get to where we need to be.
That's awesome. Thank you. On that note of looking into the future and reducing the travel time from 6 months to 6 weeks, we have our trendcaster, Shawn DuBravac, on the phone here. So, and the line here. So Shawn, thank you again for joining. I guess the question for you, just to pivot, is what's new for CES in 2021? You know, what should we expect? Maybe even in 2022, if we dare to look out, you know, that far in this environment. And do you see digital playing a bigger role in CES in the future? Oh, I think you're muted. Also, that's all right.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, you're back. Great.
Good. All right. Perfect. So obviously, CES 2021 is going to be unlike any CES that we've ever seen. You know, 50 plus years of doing physical events and putting on the biggest tech event in the world in Las Vegas has been changed by the pandemic. We're going to see it move to a virtual setting, and I think it's important to note that, and CES has been very clear about this. They're not recreating CES online, but rather trying to reimagine CES and a CES-like experience. So right off the bat, you're going to have a bit over 1,000 companies exhibiting at CES. So it's going to be a very different experience. We had about 4,500 companies exhibiting last year. So it'll be a very different experience. Chris, you talk about moving forward. I mean, clearly digital is going to become a key aspect of CES moving forward. It isn't just that this year it's all virtual and then next year it goes back to being all in person at CES. I know that the CES team and the broader tech community definitely want to get back to a physical CES where they can see the products, the demos, the prototypes in person. But I think that digital will remain a key aspect of CES, just like it is in every asset, in every facet of our lives, in every facet of business. Digital will be a piece of what we take forward. I think we're going to try, I think Tim Cook actually said it great in a virtual town hall last week, going to take what we've learned over the last year and take that forward, but we're definitely going to try to get back to an in-person type of existence. That means, you know, in Apple's case, that's back in the office. In CS case, that's back on a show floor. But you take what you learn from this and you apply it moving forward. No,
that's great, and I'm intrigued by you mentioning from 2,000 to 1,000 exhibitors this year, and I know in the past you've had over 100,000 participants. So I would imagine, and keep me honest, do you believe in 2021 we'll be able to touch more people through a hybrid CES, or do you think that will constrict a bit?
And CES, I think, is calling for about 150,000 attendees, so they expect the attendance numbers to be comparable to prior years. I think what's worth noting, to your point, is it will definitely be a more diverse, broader CES audience, I think, than we've ever seen. In recent years, CES has become very much a global event, attracting a very strong group of international attendees who've traveled to CES. I think that will continue to be the story. You're going to have a lot of international attendees at this year's at CES, at the 2021 virtual CES. But I think you're going to see a broader swath of professionals within the tech space than we've ever seen. And we're going to touch more people than we ever have. And I think that's a really interesting opportunity for the companies that are exhibiting. And I think it's a really interesting opportunity moving forward. You know, yep. Again, going back to your question about 2022, as we think about 2022, companies are going to have to almost think about hosting two separate CES events and gaining exposure across two separate CES platforms. One will be the physical in-person event that presumably, you know, is back in Las Vegas, taking place in Las Vegas. And the second one is what's happening virtual, which is going to capture a different audience, and people are going to be able to self-select into where they want to be. And so you're going to have a much bigger audience, I think, in 2022 than you've ever had in the past, because these digital elements will become part of the fabric of CES. But it definitely creates, with those opportunities, creates challenges for companies to think about, how do I navigate these two very different platforms? How do I engage and really take full advantage of the opportunities?
So just on that note, just to put you on the spot a bit, any early advice for brands who are trying to navigate both the physical and digital experience with CES, or is it too early to tell?
Well, I mean, one of the really interesting things we've seen thus far, looking at 2021, is companies building out virtual and digital platforms to really engage those participants. We've seen it from LG, Samsung, John Deere even, which is a relatively new exhibitor to CES, sent virtual headsets to some of the media to get them to feel the John Deere experience in a virtual setting. And when you think about John Deere at CES, they're bringing giant combines and other, pretty large equipment to CES, and really taking advantage of the large feel of CES to bring in that heavy equipment. And they want you to feel that same experience and see what the impact their equipment can have. And so they are trying to do that in a virtual setting. Clearly, virtual VR and AR are going to become important components of every digital experience moving forward. I think that will definitely be the case with CES. I think from an exhibitor standpoint and a company standpoint, you have to do things to reproduce the serendipity that exists at CES. There's just beautiful, rich serendipity that happens at CES that is difficult to replicate in a virtual setting. And so I think it really, this is why it's great that the BCW is hosting something like this. It really takes proactive work to engage and to create some of that serendipity. I think engaging your PR firm to proactively reach out, in John Deere's case, that was sending VR headsets. But whatever your unique proposition is, and any way you can add value to help create some of that serendipity, and to maybe even do some of that matchmaking that takes place at CES, that happens when you're in the booth and you run into old friends or you run into new contacts.
No, I think it's a good point, and we are, and thank you for mentioning us. We're definitely trying to reimagine how to create those moments, and I think it could be fun. So just to dive into just some very specific issues, let's spend a little time on 5G, a topic I know you love and you know a lot about. I guess my question for you is, what are some of the trends that we should expect to see if you just think about 5G, looking out into the future?
Yeah, so I think with 5G, we continue to roll forward. It has in the past largely been a consumer narrative, though we knew many of the features and attributes of 5G really meant that it was going to have a big impact on the industrial world. And I think we're going to really start to see that at CES this year. One of my big macro trends for CES is that it will be the largest industrial focused CES that we've ever had. That's been a trend that's been percolating and building over time. I mentioned John Deere as an exhibitor. This year at CES, you have Caterpillar exhibiting for the first time. No doubt they've seen the success that John Deere has had at CES, and so they're going to participate. I even look at how Samsung in their one of their releases talked about CES. They called it the world's largest consumer electronics and IT fair, and an IT exhibit. So they see it not only from the viewpoint of consumer electronics, the televisions and the phones that we've, and the stereo systems, the audio experiences that we've released, but more broadly, the technology that encompasses every facet of our lives. LG, we've already seen rumors that LG will have a sanitizing robot at CES, that they'll be releasing that. And so you think about, robotics moving forward and some of those other things. 5G, likewise, will, I think, have a stronger focus on what's happening in the industrial sectors. If you look at some of the early experiments in 5G, it was, let's deploy 5G in the stadium and let's create new experiences in the stadium. Well, none of us have been in stadiums in the last year, and probably the stadium usage is going to be pretty low in 2021 as well, until we see vaccines widely disseminated. And so with that, stadiums aren't really the next natural use case for 5G. So where are we going to do it? We're going to start to see private 5G networks deployed in factories. In the last month, John Deere got access to licenses in 5 counties so that they could deploy 5G in their factories. We've already seen General Motors, who's also keynoting CES, do some tests of private 5G networks in their factories. I think the industrial narrative around 5G will be important. Ericsson just released some stats actually around 5G that suggest it is the fastest deployed network of any iteration of cellular technology, that it will be accessible by 60% of the population next year. So we've seen really relatively quick deployment. Just like COVID accelerated so many things, it probably accelerated some things around 5G as well. So obviously a lot happening there, and I think we'll have some great stories come out of CES. Hans Vestberg, the CEO of Verizon, will be keynoting CES, kicking things off that opening night, if you will. So we'll hear some things from him. And again, I think he'll highlight not just what's happening on the consumer front, but what also is happening on the enterprise side. Yeah, no, that's great. Just one last question on 5G. I know folks are interested in. I guess my question is, what role do you see 5G currently playing in how our physical worlds are intersecting with augmented and virtual reality? Is that an opportunity for 5G? Is 5G enabling that faster? What's the connection there? Yeah, definitely. I think one of the big areas that 5G is empowering, broadly, is what we consider, edge computing. So mobile edge, 5G mobile edge computing. This is going to be a big opportunity for the carriers, so they'll be investing in there. I think it's a huge opportunity for companies in that space. VR and AR and kind of mixed reality is just one of the things that will happen at the edge, but I think you're going to see a lot more happen at the edge. And we really haven't yet seen some of the applications that are going to unleash the full capabilities of 5G. I think in 2021, we'll finally start to see some of those. If you think about building computing applications for the existing cellular network, you're going to optimize it based upon what's available to you. As we unleash and open up new characteristics, new attributes, and make 5G more widely available, you're going to see, I think, optimized computing experiences for that network. So we're going to see a lot happening at the edge. I think that will be our big theme for 2021, is that computing at the edge that's happening over a mobile network, primarily 5G network. That's great. All exciting stuff. Let's pivot a little bit to talk about health, and in particular digital health. I guess what do you see has been the impact on remote health options, healthcare options, as a result of the pandemic? When you sort of think about reflecting on the last 10, 11 months and impact of remote health. Yeah, I mean, obviously 5G will be a narrative building out that as well. Wouldn't it be better if I'm in a hospital facility, if I could get information quickly, as opposed to having to traverse floors, move to a different part of the hospital, especially when we're trying to limit movement in those type of environments. And so being able to move information quickly without having to move individuals across that physical space, I think is a natural place for 5G to thrive. That's why it works in factories. That's why I think it'll work in hospitals. So I think that's one. I think there's been a realization in the COVID environment that we just aren't as connected as we really thought we were, or I think as we could be. So think about how many people haven't been able to get in and see their loved ones because they were in a hospital and they weren't allowing visitors into those areas because of COVID concerns. And yet we don't really have deployed video that's always on in those environments where you can always check in on somebody as if they were there and you could walk into their physical space. So I think there's some real opportunities in that space. Obviously, all of the services that will come out of that we'll continue to see. There's a lot around capturing and collecting information. I think you're still going to see a strong story at CES around some of the wearable products. And how do we monitor our environments, not just in some of these other places, but primarily in health? And how do we monitor our own health, and how do we monitor the health of others? So you're going to see wearables and other services that will help us monitor, our loved ones, our parents, others that we may be caring for.
That's great. That's great. What's your sense of what's next with AI-powered digital health, and what are consumers expecting next from that?
Yeah, I think the biggest story for AI in 2021 is deeper integration of AI everywhere, but definitely in health. And you know, are there pieces that we can automate? And then ultimately what I see AI doing is commoditizing prediction. We take data in and then we make prediction kind of cheap and inexpensive, if you will. And throughout the history of technology, whenever we've seen something come in and make an experience cheap and inexpensive, then we have an abundance of that as a result. So you think about, you know, camera sensors is a great example. Early on, it's an expensive resource. We include just one on your phone. As it becomes a cheap, inexpensive service, then we include multiple ones on your phone, and that introduces things like selfies, right. and you know, and other things come out of that. And now we don't even hesitate to take a photo of something and send it to somebody. You know, we're at the grocery store, we're not sure if we're buying the right product. We snap a quick picture and we send it to our partner. And so image sensors got cheap, which made photography an abundant resource. And I think the same thing is going to happen with AI around predictions. It will make predictions cheap and inexpensive, and so we're going to have an abundance of that show up. You can think about that in healthcare, especially around self-monitoring. I think we've all become this year especially acutely aware of how little we're moving or how much we're moving. We're more acutely aware of how we feel. And so I think you're going to see AI really start to be embedded into those type of experiences to help us gain better insights into who we are, how we feel, what we might need to do to offset any negative feelings we have. You know, just a little while ago, last week or week before, we saw Amazon open up their Halo wearable device. It is by some accounts, a very invasive device. But one of the unique features is tonal recognition and tonal analysis. So it's a wristband that you wear. It has a microphone built into it, and it analyzes your tone to try to gauge whether you're excited, depressed, sad, you know, and it's a step in the direction of taking available information and then making predictions from that available information. So broadly, I think what we see in 2021 again around AI is deeper integration into the product, deeper integration into the service, into the experience. Early on, when we were deploying AI, say 3, 4, 5 years ago at CES, we saw it as an add-on. Here's my product, and by the way, I've added AI this year. It was slapped onto the top of the product. I think it's going to become much more deeply integrated into the experience and into the service that you're offering. So you won't really separate the two. It isn't this product with AI, but it's this experience and this solution, and here's where AI fits in, and here's where the hardware fits in. And so you're going to see AI show up everywhere. CES is still a very big automotive experience, number of major car companies exhibiting. I'm seeing a lot of sensor companies exhibiting at CES, and so they're going to be talking about how to take all of this data, incorporate it in these experiences, and provide new solutions for consumers and businesses.
Let's pivot there, because you raised something that I think is interesting that are on people's minds, not just automotive, but smart cities. Right, we're seeing a focus on making cities more resilient, just given, you know, whether it's natural disasters or in some cases civil unrest. What do you expect to see, you know, in the future relative to smart cities around automotive, sensor, energy generation? And what's your sense of what we should be looking at moving forward?
Yeah, I think cities are thinking about how they reinvent themselves moving forward. More now than ever before. You've seen a major exodus out of major metropolitan areas throughout the U.S. We all sense that probably isn't a permanent shift, but it has been a shift. And I think cities have to recognize that they're competing for residents, and they're competing for people to come and live there. And now they can bring in a whole new swath of people. And so what are the services and the offerings that they want to be offering, and where do smart technologies fit into that. I mentioned sensors in the automotive space, and clearly sensors are going to play a key role in the smart city environment. But again, it's capturing all of this data that already exists, that's out there, but hasn't been systematically organized and structured, pulling it in and then redeploying it. How can we redeploy it into new services? How can we reimagine the service environment and the service economy? And I think we're going to see a lot of that. I think CES broadly, another major theme for CES is, what does mobility look like in a post-pandemic world? So much of mobility prior to COVID was us moving around. It was us having smartphones with better batteries so we could be on the go for longer. It was about being a road warrior. It was about, last year Delta was a major exhibitor talking about the future of travel, not knowing that weeks later, very few of us would be traveling much more than 5 miles away from our homes.
Yeah.
So what does mobility look like in a post-pandemic world? Is it us moving, or is it services coming to us? Because that's largely been the narrative in 2020. It's the services moving around and the services coming to us. What's that hybrid look like post-pandemic? What does that hybrid look like going into 2021? How are we going to move, and how are the services going to move? And I think those will all be narratives that play out at CES. And you hit on a lot of the other key themes I think that cities are thinking about, that definitely the automotive industry is thinking about. What does resiliency look like? What does sustainability look like? I think electrification is going to be a key theme in the automotive space, because that fits into the sustainability and the resiliency that a lot of people are thinking about.
So last question. I know the questions from the audience are coming in sort of fast and furious for both of you. So quick last question for you, Shawn. Given all these advances in technology, and some we haven't even thought of, and I know a lot of your member companies are also sort of imagining and years ahead of what we are even seeing today. Do you think technology is outpacing consumers' expectations of what they expect of technology?
Do I think technology is outpacing consumer expectations? I don't think so. I mean, I think in some ways it's been amazing to look back at 2020 and see how quickly companies iterated around an idea, and how quickly we took technologies and started to use them in non-traditional ways. And the producers of that technologies recognized what we were trying to do and tried to meet us there, right? And we saw it early on in the pandemic. You were getting Zoom updates almost every single day, right? You were getting team updates every single day because they were iterating in real time around the product. They abandoned development around some other things to really focus on what we were trying to accomplish. And I think what we saw also in 2020 is that there's still a lot of things we want to be able to do. There's a lot of capabilities that we want to bring into our lives. And CES is about highlighting those new capabilities, highlighting the things that we never imagined to be possible. That's definitely the summation of 2020.
Yeah.
Experiencing things we never thought we would experience, experiencing things we never thought would be possible, and having technology there to navigate us through those times. And we've used technology in totally new and different ways. I think we're just scratching the surface of what technology will do. And CES has always been the home where if you've got an idea about what that world will look like, then you bring it to CES and you show it off and say, this is how I think we're going to be living. This is how I think we're going to be working and communicating in the years and decades ahead, and trying to build that narrative out. I think CES in 2021 will be squarely focused on building out the scenarios for the future. What does the future look like? Here are the solutions that you're going to need.
No, that's fantastic. Alyssa, Shawn, thank you so much for that. I can go on for a while with these questions, but I'm seeing the feed with questions come up. So I'm going to turn over. We're going to have some Q&A now for maybe the next 12, 15 minutes from some of our viewers. So I think, Carolina, you're going to lead us in that conversation.
Great. Yes, thank you. And we're going to start with Alyssa because there's a bunch of questions coming in for you. I think the first one, and I'm going to try to group them so we can answer them one by one. How did you get interested in space? Like, did you read something? Do you remember watching any movies? Was it, your family? passion? How did you get interested in space?
Yeah, I mean, obviously my memories aren't perfect from when I was a little girl, but basically the little bit that I can kind of gather and from what my dad can gather, really our best guess as to what sparked it actually was an episode of The Backyardigans, which was a cartoon I used to watch. Basically, these friends go on imaginary adventures in their backyard. One of the episodes they had where they went on a mission to Mars. And so my dad really remembers the conversation of me asking questions about space and Mars, but he doesn't really know what sparked that. But later on, I had the poster for the episode, like Mission to Mars and the Backyardigans and all in my room. But it's really the only place that we can think of as to where I would have heard the word Mars to begin with or heard the thought of space. So that's our best guess as to what it might have been, but really we aren't totally sure.
Very, very cool. What do you hope for your career? I know it's a loaded question. You know, hopefully you'll walk on Mars, which I think is something that we're all looking forward to seeing. But, you know, do you have any other hopes or dreams, or are you thinking about other places in space where you might want to be?
Right. Well, so the interesting thing about wanting to be an astronaut is that an astronaut really isn't a career. You have to have some sort of job, some sort of experience to actually get to that point. So I'm currently working to actually become an astrobiologist. So with that, I would actually be basically studying any sort of science in space. So I could do research on bacteria in space, plants in space. I could even do research on planets as a whole in space, you know, searching for Earth-like planets in other solar systems or other type of research like that. But really, you can be in charge of any sort of scientific payload that goes into space, which is really cool to be able to have that much wiggle room, I guess, in terms of what you want to research. So that's really cool. So my focus is astrobiology. Of course, with that can totally connect to being an astronaut or going on a mission to Mars as well. Some of the astronauts are typically would be testing soil samples, looking for signs of bacterial life on Mars. It's really going to be wanting to see how realistic terraforming Mars could be. How realistic is colonizing Mars? You know, we really have to have people get there and live it and feel it and be in that moment and study more about Mars so we have a better understanding of how realistic those big goals that we have for Mars are. So that obviously would be the ultimate goal. That can obviously be switched around by so many other components, but ultimately I would be working in astrobiology in some realm of space, whether that's in space, on Earth, on Mars. It's kind of, the location just kind of changes.
That's excellent. That's really interesting. So I think it's good context to our next question, which is, you know, I know you're doing a lot of these live events. Your time is very coveted, so we really appreciate you being here. How are you spending your time, especially, you know, the last 9 months with the pandemic? How have any of your trainings changed? How has your, you know, life been affected? And have you been able to do the things that you need to do for, you know, to advance your career?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely haven't been able to do the things that I normally would do, that's for sure. So pretty much my last training that I was actually able to do was last October. And since then, I haven't really been able to do any of that this year, pretty much. I also wanted to continue flying. So I'm a private pilot, but I also wanted to continue on, get my instrument rating, things like that. So all of that was kind of put to a standstill, but it was also trying to take advantage of some of the opportunities that were coming about being online. I mean, obviously over the summer, I was able to do a lot more events, do a good bit of speaking and to other kids and hopefully inspiring them to, you know, get after their own dreams, teach other people about space. So that led to a lot of those great opportunities. You know, and an internship came out of all of it. I was able to connect online with Jacobs. So I'm now an intern working for Jacobs, which has been a really amazing experience and really great to kind of just jumpstart that, get involved in working a lot more now with international space relations and, you know, working a lot more globally in terms of space. So that's been a really amazing opportunity. So although a lot of stuff has been put on hold and has kind of been taken away from this year, a whole lot else has really been added to it. So really it's just making the most out of what you can get online and taking it as far as you can take it, really.
Thank you, and thank you for joining us. I think it's really excellent to hear, your background, and we don't know how you do it, but we appreciate you being here and inspiring us all. Thank you. I think next we're going to go to Chris. We have a few questions in the queue for you. What do you suggest to brands and companies that want to kind of shine at CES in this virtual environment where, the push, people are tired of joining virtual events, and, not everyone is joining CES as they used to. What's your suggestion for companies that are trying to shine? What can they do from a communications perspective to really get their product or their announcements out there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a tough one. I'd say two things, and Shawn touched on this earlier. I think we have to find ways, given the platforms that are available to us, to create more serendipitous moments, more moments of surprise and delight. There's only so much, people can take of sort of the talking head. And as much as I think people like to hear what I have to say, it gets old after a while. So we're experimenting a lot with even bringing video and motion graphics into these platforms. We're experimenting with using breakout rooms in a very different way to drive engagement, to mix up the experience. So we're trying to create, very different, unique experiences that will surprise, delight, but also create opportunities for a deeper level of engagement, as opposed to just sort of the passive didactic listening. I'd encourage brands to do that. I think the example, which I think we're starting to see more of, and we're exploring a little bit with our clients, is how do we allow customers for our organizations to be a part of the experience and even control a part of that experience. So I love the notion of the headsets that we're giving. That I think John Deere is going to be giving to some of their the journalists that cover their beat. We're also thinking about how do we provide technology platforms that allow for the customers, for our clients, to control some of that environment, to be more active and sort of co-create the digital experience in real time. So we're experimenting with that. Again, it's all happening quite fast. So we'll see more and more of that, I'd say, in the next several weeks and months. So for sure. But great question.
Chris, I would add one thing. CES is never won or lost by a single thing, right? And the companies that have always done CES well are doing a myriad of activities over that whole week of CES, and they're doing a lot of work ahead of time, and they're doing some work after the fact. And you look at the Sonys, the Samsungs of the world, they're doing many activities across a wide time horizon, not just the 4 days that happen at CES. 2021 will be very similar, and arguably even more so. You've got to do upfront work, you've got to do some work during the event, and then you also need to do some work after the event. This year, the platform will be available for longer than those 4 days, and so I think you're going to need to do some work after the fact to bring people back to some of the announcements that you made at CES.
I think that's a really good point, and I think one of the things that will, I think post-event, leading up to and post-event become really exciting for us in the PR space, because it allows us to repurpose content on multiple different channels. So we have this multiplier effect that we're expecting will allow us to allow news and content to work much harder for us, much longer on behalf of our clients. So that's one of the things that I would expect to see moving forward. I think it'd be a great benefit to organizations trying to provide deeper experiences with connecting brands to consumers.
Great, thank you. And I think a connected question to Shawn is, how do you suggest, and maybe you're not there yet, but how do you suggest people experience CES? I'm attending, I'm logging in. How do you, have you made up your schedule for the few virtual days? How do you suggest people kind of engage in this new virtual environment?
Yeah, so this year, there will be a lot of content available. I think that 100+ sessions will be available on the platform. So if you've ever attended South by Southwest, in some ways, CES is starting to feel, this year, the virtual piece feels a little more South by Southwest to me. Whereas, historically, CES has been about meetings. It's about seeing things on the show floor. It's always been tough for me personally at CES to get to some of that that rich content that's taking place at CES. You know, you're catching a couple sessions here or there, but I think the opportunity to really dive into some of that rich content is available. Definitely, you're going to want to visit some of the exhibitors at CES. You're going to want to partake in some of the things that are happening on the peripheral of CES. I think all of those things are important. I think one of the unique opportunities of CES this year is that you're not beholden to geography constraints. And all of us have felt that at CES, where you're rushing across Las Vegas to try to get to your next meeting, which is across town, which on a normal day in Las Vegas might take you 10 minutes, takes you 2 hours during CES. All of a sudden, you get all of that time back in a virtual environment. So in some ways, there's going to be some unique opportunities at CES to really engage in more content than you've ever been able to engage in before. And I think there's an opportunity to grab some of that the new content, the new conversations, partake in that, but also see exhibitors. CES is unique in that, you know, a lot of the attendees are gaining exposure to some of these companies just once a year. So you think of, like, if you're on the Samsung beat, you know every move that Samsung is making, and you're seeing that on a daily basis. But some of the attendees at CES are only catching up with Samsung once a year. They're going into their booth, they're learning all about what they're doing, what their initiatives are, and so it's an opportunity for these companies to update the masses on the direction of CES. I think COVID really knocked us out of whack with respect to product launches and the traditional trajectory of technology. And so it's a chance for companies to kind of realign with their customers and the broader tech, the broader tech audience and tech base, and say, here's the trajectory of the company. It's hard to believe that the last CES was pre-COVID. It feels like we've kind of been somewhere between 10 months and 10 years in this COVID pandemic. We weren't even talking about it last CES. So it's a chance to take everything that's happened the last 10 months and then reaffirm this is the company's trajectory. Here's where we're going. This is our roadmap, and this is what we're doing. So I think you really want to be looking at companies and trying to ascertain what's their trajectory today. How have things changed? Because that technology rollout trajectory was really knocked out of whack because of COVID.
You know, one of the other things, just to build on that, which I think we'll start to see more of, this year and certainly beyond, is, some of the magic of CES is some of the events, right, and everything, some of the social aspects. I do know that some brands are experimenting now with what does a virtual wine tasting look like with small people? What's a virtual dinner program look like, where we're sort of sending meals to a handful of people and then trying to create some of that virtually. So I think there's a lot of creativity and imagination, that's being put into CES this year. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, and you think about what is that dinner really doing? It's recognizing somebody. It's making them feel like they're part of a group. Maybe that's a special group. Maybe that's an exclusive group. It's making them, feel noticed. And so, and that's really what you're trying to do at CES. I think what you're trying to do with the 2021 virtual CES is identify those people and let them feel noticed. Let them be part of a group. And in some ways, to your point, Chris, there's lots of opportunities to create unique, exclusive groups, which sometimes you're more constrained at a physical CES because you can't get a room at a certain restaurant, or you can't get these other amenities that you need, or you can't make the logistics work. We're removing some of those things this year. And so I think if companies really think outside the box, there's a lot of great opportunities. I think John Deere is a phenomenal example right off the bat, but I think there's others they're going to really show us some really interesting possibilities.
Could not agree more. Yeah.
So there's a good question that's a good segue to the discussion that you're both having now is, are we going to see less of the big brand announcements? Are companies going to hold, maybe they were ready to launch a product or make a big announcement, but they decided it's not worth it in this environment, or they're just going to hold to a post-COVID era where maybe consumers and people are going to be able to interact with their products? Do you think there's going to be a lot of that, of brands just shifting their strategy where they would typically advertise at CES? They're not doing so this year.
Chris, you want to dive in?
Yeah, you see me jump through the screen. You know, look, I don't think so. I still think CES is beyond a moment. It's an extraordinary series of moments. At an inflection point on, you know, year beginning, introduction of new technology, you know, with 150,000, you know, participants connecting, you know, in person and virtually. I think there's a tremendous opportunity to continue to use the platform for product launches and the like. So I don't see that relenting, candidly. I would only see it perhaps even increasing. However, what I would say is we would use the time slightly differently. I think the run up to CES, becomes important, right? And that becomes an opportunity, I'd say, for product announcements, and then I'd say following to engage with various audiences. But I don't see the announcements, slowing down. I would hope they wouldn't for that reason.
Yeah, I think if you look at the legacy of CES, it was a buyer's show. And so companies released product that they were going to make available later in the year and deliver to retailers. Some of that has changed, but there's still a lot of retailers that use CES to solidify contracts and solidify purchase agreements. And there's still a lot of companies that are using CES, the timeline of CES, to release their new models for the ensuing year. So that piece of just getting business done needs to continue now more than ever. And you look at the way LG is building out their virtual space. In many ways, it feels like an office, like you're bringing somebody in to show them products, to sign contracts, to get deals done. So CES still first and foremost is a business event to get business done. I think companies really want to get business done in 2021. And then I think to your point, Chris, we are somewhat Pavlovian in our response to the new year. You expect to see product announcements and new technology at the start of the year coinciding with CES, and I think we're looking for that. We're looking to start 2021 on a hopeful, optimistic note, and nothing does that better than new technology.
Could not agree more. I think we have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions, Carolina.
Yeah, I think maybe one more, and Shawn, this one is for you, and maybe Chris, you could share that too. And Shawn, you're going to get to experience CES very differently this year, which is kind of nice. As you said, you're going to get to see a lot of the content that you maybe typically wouldn't have. What are you most excited about?
I honestly, there's so many things. I always get so excited leading up to CES and talking about CES. I'm excited to see a lot of things that Chris and I talked about. The deeper integration of AI, I think, is something that will be really exciting. What are the new services going to look like for a post-pandemic world? What does mobility look like in a post-pandemic world? I want to hear companies really talk to me about how they're going to carry me into the future. And that is, first and foremost, what CES is all about. This is what's coming down the pike. This is what the future looks like, and this is what we're trying to bring to market and bring to fruition. Here's our vision for that future. And so I'm looking for companies that are going to carry me into the future. And I think that there's a lot of optimism right now. I feel like we've gotten a lot of great news around vaccines and other things. I think we're entering CES on a great note. And so I'm looking forward to those kind of exciting nuggets of this is what the future holds.
Yeah, so I agree 100%, and I'm actually really excited, having been to the show several years, around digital health innovations, things that we haven't even imagined yet, and things that are being explored, innovations that are being explored. Very, very, very interested in some of the work coming out of smart cities and mobility. The auto space I know is really been leaning in, and we've got client we support. That's very, very focused on mobility, which is exciting to see. So I can't wait. It's always an exciting time of year, and I do think you're right that there's a spirit of optimism right now, and I do think that CES could just accelerate that and deliver on that for everyone.
Yeah, and 2020 changed the way we interact with technology, not just as individuals, but as employees, as businesses. It fundamentally shifted how we thought about technology and how we interacted with it. And so I think what we're going to see at CES 2021 and what we expect to see moving forward is how are we going to interact with technology next? What's coming next? You know, and that's the beauty of CES, is it's going to teach us how we're going to interact with technology and what technology is going to do for us and how it will empower us.
On that futuristic note, author, trendcaster, Shawn DuBravac, thank you so much for your time. Alyssa Carson, we deeply appreciate you spending time with us today. I hope everyone took something away from this conversation that may help you as you think about CES or just 2021 in general. I want to thank the producers of the program, and I wish everyone a safe and happy holiday season. And we'll see everyone in some form or fashion at CES 2021. Bye.